Okay, let me just take a few more minutes. I want to talk about adolescence for a couple of minutes. We've learned a lot about the adolescent brain in the last little while, but I want you to understand that adolescence is a difficult time of life where you are uncertain about where you're going to be as an adult in many cases. And adolescence is a time of great self-doubt. A lot of adolescents wake up every day wondering if they'll ever be thin enough, popular enough, athletic enough, attractive enough, smart enough, successful enough, and you just have a lot of doubts. When adults would like to be younger, they would rarely like to go back to their teenage years. Having said that, though, adolescents are some of our best people around. I remember when there was you remember the mad cow crisis out west, any of you? When the cows got sick? It was 2 teenage girls in Alberta who started a letter writing campaign to convince Canadian corporations to support Canadian farmers. The adults weren't doing anything. They were just looking for the government to send money. It was 2 teenage girls who started that letter writing campaign when the adults were doing nothing. They're capable of remarkable things. However, it's also, you have to change your techniques a little bit for discipline. Because what happens with the adolescent brain is this. The brain of a young child lacks a protein called myelin. Now, to understand myelin, it's like going to the hardware store to buy some wiring for your house. It has a coating on it. What that coating does is it stops short circuits when you put the wiring in, and it makes things run much faster. Well, that's what it does for the brain. It happens at the end of adolescence. The entire brain, whatever is there at the end of adolescence, gets coated with this protein that stops it from short-circuiting and makes it work much faster. So it will be able to deal with adult decision-making and adult problem-solving and all of that stuff. The problem is, once that protein is inserted into the brain no longer grows very quickly, and it won't make new connections in new areas very quickly. So if you're going to learn new musical instruments and new languages, it's easiest to do it when you're young, because once this protein comes in, you have to try to create new sounds with a brain that was only created for other sounds. So you'll end up with an accent you'll never be able to get rid of. But if you learn it young enough, that won't happen. So the brain of a young child without that protein grows at an astonishing rate. And it connects everything to everything. Around the age of 11, it'll start to figure out what it needs. But initially, it connects everything to everything. And around the age of 11, it gets overgrown and clogged. And information doesn't get in there very easily anymore. And even when you give directions to your children, sometimes you'll be standing there going, "Hello? Are you with me here? What?" And because you're just fighting against a clog. They'll often turn up music. You have to talk louder because you're now trying to get it through this mess in their brain. When the brain reaches that point, it begins an extraordinary process that takes several years during adolescence. Starting at the back and working towards the front, it takes parts of itself offline. It switches it off and prunes it of all the excess stuff it doesn't need, just like you would prune a bush, and then it reorganizes everything and puts it back in place. And if you're a computer expert, it's like deleting all the unused programs and icons and then defragging your computer. That's really what the brain is doing. And back to front, this is where habits and routines are. So I still remember with my eldest son, one of the things for me, I like my children to hold doors open for other people. And when we're going someplace and there's a family right behind, like going into a store or whatever, I make it very clear you hold it for them too. for not having it swing closed in their face. And I was just so consistent, it became very routine from the consistency. I still remember, he was very good at this. We were at Pizza Hut on Lake Street. Walks up to the door, he was about 11 or 12, walks up to the door, opens it, walks through like he's the only living being in the area, and then lets it swing closed to my face. You're standing there going, "Hi, here we go, here we go." It's like a switch was flipped. And fortunately, because that's not happening, I just opened the door, lowered my voice, and we were having an interesting discussion. Forget whether we were having an interesting discussion about raising your voice. I was talking about raising the voice with a loss of self-control and like being angry and annoyed and stuff like that. There's a technique in discipline where you can raise your voice to be what we call emphatic, including with children, but there's no loss of control, where you can go, "No," or "Get back here," or something. That's just giving emphasis. That's a different raised voice. I was talking about the raised voice of people who are yelling warnings and threats to their children, which is different. So anyway, I opened the door to Pizza Hut, lowered my voice, said, "Terry." And he goes, "What?" "Huh? What were you taught to do with doors, son?" He goes, "Oh yeah, hold them." Thank you. But then I had to do it, and you're back into giving reminders because of this disconnect. Now, the pruning, oh, by the way, so my other son then held the inside door because the next person up holds the door for everybody else, and we went in to have lunch. There was a family coming right behind me, and I actually asked the fellow to just wait for a second while I called my son back to do what he was supposed to do to hold the door. So he just waited for a second, and then everybody went in. He comes over to me halfway through lunch at Pizza Hut and says, "I'm sorry to interrupt your lunch, but I just had to come over and congratulate you on what you did with your son at the door there. Nobody takes the time to do that anymore." Are you seriously? Like teaching a child courtesy and manners by just calling him back to do things the right way is so rare. Complete strangers now interrupt your lunch in a restaurant when you do it? Like, is that where we're at? Because everybody's willing to yell at the kids. What happened to just come back, do it properly, do what you were told to do? So, wow. Anyway, as the brain begins its pruning from back here, the pruning is so significant, there's a part of the brain called the corpus callosum, which joins the two halves of the brain. It will lose over 1/3 of its thickness from being pruned. That's how serious this is. And one of the things parents have to deal with during this period is millions upon millions upon millions of dead ends, where they give their adolescent child a piece of information and it doesn't get where it needs to go, where it gets somewhere and they can't find it, where they find it but can't figure out how to get it back out. And so often what's required is a little bit of patience and a willingness to repeat some things, because we get very annoyed because we think, at your age, I shouldn't have to tell you more than once. When the brain is going through this process, you actually need to be patient about that and be willing to give the information again because of what the brain is going through. As it does this, it'll get to the emotional brain, and then the serious part happens. In the front of the brain is a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex that runs your life. Think of it as the remote control. And it gives you the ability to organize yourself, to figure out what other people are doing, to figure out how you're going to handle it, to use your social skills. It does your planning for you. It uses good judgment. It gives you your self-control. Everything that you need to run your life. This is why in accidents, frontal head injuries are so serious. Everything you need to run your life is here in your brain. As it sweeps over and starts to reorganize, you run into some issues, because the part of the brain that analyzes why parents and teachers do what they do becomes unavailable for a while, and adolescents will start to misunderstand what adults are doing and misrespond to it. So for instance, typically, in the part of the brain right here, when it's working, is a concept that adults give advice. But when this is unavailable to give that analysis, the emotional part of the brain believes all advice is criticism. And you'll hear your teenagers complain you're always on their case about something, that you're always criticizing them. And I know what you'll do. You'll try to talk to this part of the brain even though it's unavailable. You'll go, no, I'm trying to help you here. No, you're not. When people get into the teenage years, one of the techniques you have to start to use is to take the emotional brain out of it by letting people calm down. Using a technique called delayed discussion, where you delay this until people are calm, because once a teenager's emotional brain starts reacting to things, it doesn't solve problems and it doesn't handle things well. So just waiting, and that's especially true if the parent's emotional brain is starting to get all wound up. Because I'm going to tell you, whether it be father or mother, the parent's emotional brain getting into a fight with a teenager's emotional brain can destroy a day, just like that, and accomplish absolutely nothing. Now, even if you let everything calm down and take the emotions out of it, I would suggest you resist the temptation to go face-to-face with adolescents. Because we often do that with young child. You look at me while I'm speaking to you. Because their brain here is working, and it's going to give one of two interpretations, depending upon your way of doing things. When you say, you look at me when I'm speaking to you, either their brain will go, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. Or it'll go, uh-oh, this must be serious. Because it'll respond depending upon how you do things. It'll respond one way or the other. The teenager's brain says, uh-oh, I'm about to hear a lecture about something I did wrong. And what it tends to do in the face of this is to throw up a wall and you don't get listened to. And what parents find is that you get into what we call a face-off, and the rule, by the way, is with teenagers, nothing good ever comes from getting into a face-off. What people find is do it face-to-face, they'll tell you nothing. Drive them someplace in the car for an hour, they'll tell you everything. We used to have the best discussions with our children doing things like washing and drying dishes, moving things around, going for a walk together, sitting side by side or something, as opposed to getting into the face-off, because what happens is their brain loses the ability to respond properly to face-to-face situations for a while. And so you're usually better off, and I like actually working on things with children when I'm talking to them because they have more energy than we do, as you can tell from the little ones around. They have more energy. If you make them sit for a long time, they just get agitated. If they're busy with something, you can talk for hours. If they're busy with something, you can have great conversations. Along with that, and National Geographic said, if you start getting into some arguments with children at a certain age, like around 14, please remember that in the history of mankind, children used to leave the house and leave the family at age 14 or age 15. And genetically bred into human beings is a couple of things that tend to make that happen. And one of them is around the age of 14, they get fed up with being told what to do all the time. And it's just bred right into people. And they think, I know everything. I can do it by myself. Don't tell me what to do all the time. And that was part of our success as people. And then along with that, because if that got them out of the nest, out of the house, they might only move next door. For people who spread over the world, there's another thing that allows them to move to the other side of the mountain instead of next door, even though things aren't going well for people on the other side of the mountain. But that'll never happen to me. And they don't assess risks very well. You'll see it on skateboards. You'll see it where that belief, it'll never happen to me, and they'll do things that involve risks because it's a time period during their lives when they don't assess this. May I also suggest that you understand that the hormones of adolescents affect the quality of sleep. And even if they sleep enough hours, it's often not very good sleep. And with many adolescents, a very visible gap develops in the morning between when they get up and when they wake up. As much as an hour and a half. In between the time that they get up and the time that they wake up, they can do what we call procedural things, but not problem-solving things. Procedural things: get dressed, get some food, grab your stuff, get out the door, the things that don't require any problem-solving. It is, for most teenagers, the worst part of the day for solving problems. So don't go after stuff at first thing in the morning because, let me say it in a simpler way. If you have adolescents, the mere fact that they're moving doesn't mean they're human. I'll just say it like that. And then finally, about adolescents, well, actually I have two things left to say. Interestingly, brain research says every adolescent is a little different. Some of them, the brain takes a long time to go through this, some of them a short time. It does it in a different order for different people. Everybody's a little different. They've only found one thing that is common to most people, and it only applies to boys. In the male brain, the part of the prefrontal cortex of the brain right here that provides good judgment is almost always the last part of the male brain to reconnect and start working again. And brain research says that in males, the part of the brain that provides good judgment may not reactivate until as late as age 24. Which means only the rental car companies understood the problem all along. Because they have historically they've considered all men to be judgmentally impaired until age 25 and wouldn't let them anywhere near a car. And I'm old enough to remember when women could rent a car at age 21 in Canada. Men had to wait. And then they came up with this law that said you can't discriminate by age, so they raised the age for women because they had no intention of lowering it for men. So there you go. But even on the handout, I suggested a number of things to help, that you can teach your children to really help. And may I suggest for adolescents, one of the most important things that you can teach them, because they're developing their own opinions, which I love. But their opinions lack experience, of course, because they haven't been around as long as we have. And I should say that in expressing them, please keep in mind they usually think they're about 3 years older than they really are, and we talk to them as if they're about 3 years younger than they really are, because they grow up faster than we can adjust. So there's this about 6-year gap, and it makes it hard to have conversations because people feel like they're not being respected, and teenagers feel like they're not being respected. So watch that, because they really think, when you're talking to a 16-year-old, they'll see themselves about 19 in terms of being able to handle the world and everything, think they can do everything and so on. One of the best things that they can learn, because they'll start having disagreements, they start to express their opinion. I love that. I love it when they have their own opinion. You have to teach them that when people disagree, they're almost always both right. Because one of the problems with people, especially stubborn people, is they start to come to the conclusion that if they're right, the other person's wrong. And they get into all these arguments. And interestingly, by the way, my second eldest son, very stubborn and strong-willed, married to someone equally stubborn and strong-willed, they had to go for some marriage counseling. He calls me after the first session. He says, "I shouldn't tell you this, Dad. I really shouldn't. The marriage counselor says that he can tell right away that when we argue, we're trying to beat each other down so one will win and one will lose." And he said, "We need to understand that we're very different people, and that usually when we disagree, we're both right, and we need to start listening to each other and listening to each other's point of view and acknowledging that instead of battling." And there's this long pause where I said nothing. He goes, "Yeah, I know, Dad, but I needed to hear from somebody else other than you, okay?" But that was lesson number 1 for marriage counseling too. That when people, because remember, a lot of us marry our opposite because it grounds us. And when there are disagreements, you're almost always both right. And successful people listen to each other and acknowledge those differences. And people who have relationship problems, they keep trying to beat the other person down instead of listening. So if they learn that during adolescence, then it's really valuable. So, and I love working with adolescents. They have a great sense of humor and so on about stuff. They're just a joy to work with. If I did my job properly tonight, almost everything that I said about teaching children to behave properly will, in your heart, you'll be going, right on. Right on. Because I don't make up anything new. I actually, for years and years, have paid attention to what the great parents and the great teachers do and how they get such great results. And the great parents and great teachers aren't spending every day threatening to take things away from people. They're actually going after exactly what's on your wall up there. And remember, by the way, you'll hear people who use these techniques, who use punishment, because you can't punish all day long. They'll make comments like, don't sweat the small stuff. But in good discipline, you make sure the small things are done right to set a foundation for the big things to be done right. Or, I'll say it this way, especially looking at those signs. If you won't take the time to get please, thank you, may I, good morning, pick this up and put this away, you have no chance of getting be home by 10. Because just like teaching arithmetic in school, you can't get long division and multiplication if you didn't take the time to do adding and subtracting. It's the small things done the right way that form the foundation of the big things being done the right way. Age-old wisdom is what we need. And when it comes to age-old stuff, may I suggest we live in a world where things like, there was this thing about doing chores at home has to be attached to what do I get, to allowance. I'm going to tell you that when I became a parent, chores were used to teach children responsibility and the importance of contribution within the community of the family. The purpose, because you should always know the purpose of what you're doing, was to teach children that you help out every day from the heart, a concept called pitching in, where if company just left the house and you turn and see a kitchen full of dishes, you don't go and play video games. You say, wow, what a mess, do you need a hand? And we taught that by actually doing it when the children were playing with toys, and we realized as parents they could take out more toys in 2 minutes than they could put away in 2 hours. And every day we looked at them and said, it's time to clean up. Because it's a big mess, I'll help. And what we taught them every day was that in a loving, caring family, even if you made a big mess, people help each other to get these jobs done in a loving, caring family. And what goes around comes around. And some experts said, oh no, it takes too long to teach children to help out from the heart. It's easier to teach them to help out from a deal, by making a deal. If you'll do these jobs, I'll give you this much money, or this, I'll give you a treat. Deal making is the second lowest level of moral development in human beings. So I really suggest you make sure you teach the children good values. Give them responsibilities every day instead of deals and bribes every day. Responsibilities. Use allowance to teach them how to be responsible with money. I suggest 3 piggy banks. You might already do it. Some to give, some to save, some to spend. Because research says 70% of parents allow their children to spend all of their allowance. That's a mistake, folks, teaching children that all their money is spending money, because then when they get a job, they think their paycheck is to throw away stuff. And you want to have skills for handling these things. So some to give, some to save, some to spend. And the mosque has a building fund. They can give it to the mosque. And so on. So just age-old wisdom in terms of raising children. I think we need some practical common sense again, not a new theory, just some practical common sense. So I've gone well over time, and I didn't mean to do that. But don't stand here and just read prepared notes and so on. But I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving me your time and being so generous with your time. I try to share enough things that everybody will get something out of it. And I also try to challenge your thinking, so you'll make a decision, because we need to do a really good job in today's world about teaching our children how to handle what's going on in the world out there and how to have values in handling today's world. Because the values can't just be in a mosque. They have to be in everyday life. They have to show up in how we do things every single day. And that takes a lot of teaching. And I want you to be like the driving instructor. Can I give you what's on the other side too? Do you know what I mean by shop teacher? Did anybody take woodworking or something like that? Just a few people? I'm going to tell you, when it comes to doing like woodworking, the teachers who teach woodworking think the school system's focus on consequences is the most ridiculous thing in the world. Because you know what the consequences are of not knowing what you're doing? You lose your fingers. So you know what the shop teachers do, the woodworking shop teachers do? They won't let you anywhere near a piece of equipment until you are ready to do it the right way. And to make sure you're ready to do it the right way, they systematically train you in the exact procedures for the right way of doing things, and then establish when you're ready to do it. Perfect. That's exactly it. We've got lots of examples. We just need to bring that attitude to our children. Works beautifully. So thank you ever so much for, and I hope it's been useful. I hope it fits well with the values that you espouse in your community. I love communities where values are at the top, because in the school system these days, it's an add-on program with a once-a-month theme. And I just love it when you have a community that says our values are right up there and really important to us, because that's what this discipline is all about. So thank you, everybody, for sharing an evening with me.